Hello, my fellow Earthlings. I am making this little video as an introduction to an earlier video I made 2 years ago about the science of yoga and learning, and the fact that I teach it, have for 50 years, and it's a good idea to, if you're going to study it, to learn from someone who knows a fair amount about it. It's a very big science. I studied 9 forms of yoga. The reason I'm putting this little insert at the beginning is that I've done a little bit of research lately in looking at DNA testing. This is a way of measuring the telomere testing, which is a little wrapping at the end of your DNA. The measurement of that determines how much you are aging, how old you have gotten, and the result of the test after years of practicing yoga, which I attribute a lot to the breathing. Actually, I breathe hours per day, not just do a breathing technique or a rebirthing thing. The result is that at age 73, my actual biological age, the age of my cells, the age of my body, my brain cells, is actually only 48. So that's a significant reduction in aging. If you can be 25 years younger than you're supposed to be, which is my case, then you have a great life, a great healthy life. I have no health issues whatsoever. I have the vitality I had in my 30s and 40s, same. So the practice of yoga, and I practice 9 forms of yoga. I'm not talking about stretching exercises. I'm talking about the whole mind-body connection, the practices of the stretches, including the breath that goes with it, the movements, etc. It's kind of like a daily dance for me, which it's not something I do all day long, but the breathing I do apply all day long. Quite often I am reminded by my own mind to breathe again. So the video that follows is explaining that the forms of yoga, the whole science is quite important, not just going to a stretching class. It's something you need to incorporate daily, but daily maintenance, if it can extend your life and the quality of your life, is worth doing. That's all. Listen carefully and think about doing these things. We have online classes at chakrayoga.com. We have a center in Thailand at Pyramid Yoga Center where we teach these things and teach them with all the details you need to actually succeed with yoga in improving your health, getting rid of health problems, and extending your healthy life. Hello, my friends. This is just a little story about me, myself. My story about my relationship with yoga, essentially. Began when I was 20, looking at books in the library. 21, made my departure from the Western world to travel and explore and find some kind of a purpose for life, which led me to India 1 year later. It didn't take long for me to find a direction to India. I had begun my yoga practice at the same time as I started traveling, and my autobiography is called Journey Out and In, is what it's called, because the journey that began as a tour around the world turned inward to an inner journey that went deeper and deeper, and within the year getting to India and just diving into the world of the chakras. So I'm putting this out because various people come and study with me, and if you want to come and study with me, it's a good idea to know a little bit about me. I've had 700 people come through the Thailand Center here and graduate as teachers, and most of those people spent 3 months with me, so they kind of know me well enough. But for those of you who don't and haven't heard my story, I was going to say a little bit about it. So finding Swami Gitananda and diving into the chakra world was, to me, like being on a search for eternal life and finding the fountain of youth. It was the key to understanding reality. Reality, I was already getting the message from my studies in science that energy was a very important connection, and seeing the world. So I left the system after 1968, actually, is when I decided to stop the normal lifestyle that I was following. I was already in a good position working for the government of Ontario in civil engineering, and I had switched into legal surveys as a cleaner job where you're simply outdoors and in the forest most of the time. But it was a boring lifestyle, and I wanted to find something more interesting. I felt from the inside there was something lacking and something missing, which might have come from a kind of a spiritual upbringing. Anyway, I smashed up my car on my 20th birthday after being stood up by my girlfriend of the time. And after that drunk driving night and totaling my car, I made a choice over the weekend. It was Friday night. Over the weekend, it's okay. I don't really like drinking anyway, so I stopped, and I'm going to go back to my studies of energetics and something about traveling, which I had started looking into again. And the energetics, I had a good friend, Blair, who we used to have long discussions about quantum theory. Actually, it was called the theory of relativity in those days, and philosophical discussions. That was interesting to me. Not drinking with my workmates and watching TV, I just didn't relate to it. Anyway, after smashing my car, decided to go traveling and explore the world and find the purpose of life. And having been to Expo 67 in Montreal, some of you may not be old enough to remember these things, but it sort of blew my mind away to see all these pavilions by different countries and different cultures, and huge created pavilions, unusually made with different structures. I mean, the Canadian pavilion was an upside down pyramid, for instance. I was just amazed at the creativity and the world that was out there. So I decided in '67, when leaving this expo, there was a big billboard that said Expo 70 Japan. So I decided I was going to go there. I said, okay, I want to go there. But I needed to work for a couple of years and make money and to be able to go. So I started my traveling around the world. Japan was my focus, but after leaving the career, which was a career with the Department of Highways in Ontario, I mean, a job guaranteed for life until your retirement, it's all set up, but kind of a dead end. But because of that, it was an apprentice program where you worked and studied and then wrote exams periodically and go up to the next level. So after going to the next level, level 3, I handed in my resignation. Everybody thought I was crazy, going traveling, where are you going and how are you going to do this? And I just had a one-way ticket. My plan was one way, no plan to return actually. So because I was working for the government, we had an expense account and I wasn't drinking anymore. I wasn't drinking much anyway, but all my checks went to the bank. So 1 year of working, living on a government expense account allowed me with enough money to simply retire or to quit and go traveling. Handed in my resignation and off I went. In my travels, as I began traveling, I would pick up hitchhikers if there were any. And I picked up a hitchhiker who we talked for a while, and he heard about my travels, that I was leaving this Western world behind and going to explore life and going to all these different countries. He said, I have an interesting trip that you would find very enjoyable, I think, and he gives me a little hit of LSD, which was actually called strawberry acid, one that the Beatles wrote a song about, which I didn't understand at all at the time I first heard the song. But anyway, I had never smoked anything or taken any kind of drugs. This was a completely new possibility for me, and I carried it around for a couple of months before taking it. I'm not sure what would happen, but in taking it, I had this experience of being on the beach in Florida, my first winter away from Canada, and I had a library full of philosophy books in the back of my car, and books on world religions and philosophy and science and relativity, and the ABCs of Relativity by Bertrand Russell. I remember one of my favorite little books. Anyway, made me question life and reality, but put me in touch with a reality, a possibility of reality. And Einstein's theory wasn't just a theory, but a reality at this point, matter and energy being two different sides of one coin. They're both the same thing, but seen from different perspectives. And the time question of, if you're traveling close to the speed of light, the speed of time changes considerably, so time is hardly passing for you, but for the people you left behind, you're aging, or they are aging quickly, and you are not, because you're traveling fast. Anyway, these questions, and about energy, and it's all energy. So the LSD made me see the energy world. Everything became alive. I was at night on a beach in Florida, no moon, no light anywhere for miles around, but I could see. I'd never seen phosphorescence before, and the waves were glowing. There were particles of things in the sand that were glowing like stars, and there was no moon, but there were stars everywhere, and they were twinkling, and everything became energy, and everything was made of energy, and I felt this, and I saw this, and I was experiencing, even walking back from the beach over the sand dunes to my car down this little trail, again, pitch black. I could see the trail because I could see all the plants. All the plants were glowing, which is something I had never seen before, I didn't imagine even existed. But there it was. There was an aura around each of the plants, and I could see all this, and it was lighting up the trail, so I could see where I was going. I was just, wow, this is an amazing experience. So that's the experience that made me realize there's more to perception and consciousness. And I had books on perception in my philosophy books also. So they talked about different states of consciousness, different perceptions, and I didn't know what that meant until that night. So over the next day or two, I made my decision that I was going to follow up on the books that I had, in which the Buddhist books and the yoga books were talking about states of consciousness and learning about energy worlds and prana and invisible energy and stuff. Made me decide, okay, I'm going to go and find out about this. So that my decision to go to India and jump into the yoga world came from that experience and from my curiosity that made me leave the Western civilization in the first place. So stepping back from there into earlier childhood, wonderful, loving, peaceful childhood with parents who were religious but also very spiritual. And my father had spent 25 years in a Catholic monastery because his mother died when he was 5, and he was brought up. It was an orphanage, and then he stayed and became a monk. And he was very much living from the heart, and his purpose was to do the will of God, etc. After he died, I gave up on churches and religion, but there was something in there of finding a purpose in life that was beyond getting a paycheck and going to the bars and buying consumer goods. So it's part of my motivation. Also because it was a clean childhood. I never saw an argument, never saw violence in home life. Going to school was another issue, and because my parents were very uh, protective and didn't like me to go play with friends whose parents were drinkers or not considered good enough. So I didn't have a lot of friends. I spent a lot of time by myself. I had an older brother who showed me how to do a lot of things, and I created and built with little wooden building blocks before the age of Lego, and before plastic, actually. There was no plastic when I was a child. It hadn't been invented yet. Imagine that. I'm sure most people can't, a world without plastic. But I lived in it. Anyway, I had a very creative childhood, loving and supportive, and everything I did was looked at with appreciation by my parents and my siblings. So it left me with a sense of confidence and happiness. And my father traveled. I was born in Vancouver. We moved to Winnipeg and then to Montreal, right across the country. And so when I finished high school, I didn't like living in the middle of Canada, so I usually said, okay, I'm just going to leave. And then traveling was easy after that. I didn't have any roots, let's say. I had curiosity, but no roots. So because of the childhood in being protective, I didn't have a lot of social interaction with people. Going to school, I hated. I liked coming home and playing with my building kits and my mechano sets and my chemistry set. The kids at school just played baseball or didn't do much else. They didn't even have televisions in those days. In fact, we had the only television in town, in this little town that we lived in, having moved there from Montreal. Anyhow, I found out later, after yoga, that having a good childhood allowed me to move forward and explore with the freedom to be and the feeling of security and curiosity. After I started teaching yoga some couple of years later, I realized that most people didn't have that childhood, that many people come through abusive childhoods, and it creates a lot of blockages and resistance to doing anything. There's a lot of fear coming from it. And when you apply that fear to the world of yoga, where you have to go inward and go beyond your feelings and hold your breath until you feel you're going to die and go beyond that, people can't do it if they haven't had a good childhood. In fact, when they start breathing deeply, a lot of the childhood issues and abusive things and trauma all begins surfacing, which wasn't my case. But as a teacher later on, I realized, whoa, people come from pretty heavy spaces. And it seemed to me like some people were kind of born in hell compared to where I was born into a very loving and peaceful family. So, travels, a hitchhiker, I had this freedom and ability to just be and travel and explore without any fears and reservations, and just going off around the world, country to country, didn't faze me. It just seemed very interesting. Now, this is 1969 when I left, and not many people traveled like this, especially internationally and around the world. So those who I left behind thought I was crazy were partly right, because there were no Lonely Planet guidebooks or anything in those days. You had to figure it out country by country in countries where you didn't speak the language. You had to figure out how to go into a restaurant and order food, and all these things were kind of challenges to my lack of social development. So I really had to become more extroverted and figure out how to communicate with people and ask people in a language I didn't know, with sign language or whatever, how to get to the train station or wherever I was going. Again, the library in the back seat of my car, ABCs of Relativity, Will Durant's History of Philosophy, Alan Watts' Comparative Religions, a book on yoga, life books on the mind. This was my mindset and my curiosity, and why going into an altered state of consciousness really made me see and perceive why be philosophical at all. It just opened me up to going beyond normal life and normal existence. Seeing the energy is what blew me away. I realized, whoa, there's an unseen world that I didn't know about before. And by changing your consciousness, you can become aware of this. And since yoga had talked about this states of consciousness and energy world, that fueled my decision to go. So the first turning point was smashing my car and stepping out of the system, deciding to go travel. Now this turning point was realizing the travel was going on this inner journey to the world of yoga in India, which was my destination. Originally the destination was Japan, and then I thought going to Australia to work maybe, but now it was India, no questions. So the hitchhiker I had picked up, who gave me the strawberry acid in the beginning, was part of the subculture, the psychedelic revolution and the hippie movement of the time, of which I didn't know much. As a Canadian, we didn't even have anti-war protests, but I guess it was a big thing in the States. I remember reading about it. And a lot of people I met during that year of traveling had dropped out of society because they no longer believed in the American dream. I spent a certain amount of time in America and down in Mexico. And in traveling further and even getting to India, a lot of Americans who had quit dropped out. A lot of them didn't have much money. They were just kind of high school graduates or dropped out of university because they saw the illusion of it all. But I was in a different category because I had lots of money and I was traveling and I had a purpose, and so that purpose kept me going. But I really enjoyed meeting these different people who had come from different lifestyles and different parts of the world as I got more international, exchanging stories with people, travel stories. You know, I talked about traveling, no Lonely Planet guidebooks, but you met people who were coming from where you were going to, and they had information about the next step of where you were going, and I would tell them where I had been staying and how I got there, which way to travel. So it was a nice social interaction. In that interaction, I met people. After Florida, I went through the southern states and into Mexico and met other people there who knew what yoga was first time. I met other people who had some clue. They had taken some kind of substances. Some of them smoked marijuana, which I had never smoked, and got into smoking a little bit and practicing yoga with some friends, and wow, this felt like a whole new life, positive and optimistic. And I was traveling and going and meeting other people who were talking about consciousness and a new world based on more less working model and less of a war theme. I mean, this was the middle of the Vietnam War at this time, so it was a big topic. So anyway, got into finding out these things, and in Mexico, I actually heard the Beatles album, the White Album, which they had recorded, Strawberry Fields Forever, and now I understood Strawberry Fields Forever is strawberry acid, because when you take it, you're in this timeless place that goes on forever, a world where nothing is real and everything is colorful like strawberries and beautiful. I still didn't have any idea that they had actually gone to India to learn about these things before I did, in the mid-60s thereabouts, or maybe 68, I don't remember exactly when, but later on when I got to India, I went to the Beatles ashram and realized okay, this is cool. This is where they came and studied about sound and mantra and wrote many trippy songs. I actually have a picture of me sitting in a little dome, which was John Lennon's dome, and it was number 9. And there were a song on the album called Number 9. And all these things later on, I was like, well, okay, it was a trippy world even before I tripped into it. Anyway, the journey went on through Japan, studied Buddhism in Japan, met some really good friends there, spent several months in Japan the whole summer. In the fall, I moved on and down to Hong Kong and Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, and here in Thailand. And then from Bangkok over to India. It took me 1 year to get to India from that original departure journey, the trip, which was happened to be New Year's Eve 1969, or New Year's Eve for 1970. And the year of 1970 was my traveling year. January of 71, got to the ashram, and the journey became much more internal. But the whole journey became more and more magical in meeting special people, reading Autobiography of a Yogi, and at the same time I had another couple of books, a series of books called Lord of the Rings, which was a magical mystery tour, which the Beatles sang about also. Anyway, getting up through Thailand here, Bangkok was, again, in the Vietnam War, was full of GIs, a lot of drugs and people on leave, and spent, after 3 weeks in Bangkok, actually smoking a certain amount of what they called Buddha grass at the time, which was mildly addictive because it was grass sprinkled with opium dust. And then, okay, that was it. After a while, I said, okay, I got to get out of here, and I took a flight over to India, $65. Landed in Calcutta, and again, I had met someone I stayed with in Penang down in Malaysia, who taught me how to finally do the headstand. He was a fellow from India who mentioned, when you get to India, you will find your guru, no problem. Because he saw that I was really, that was my focus, that was my curiosity, this is what I did and what I was studying and reading about, etc. So in India, someone had said, there's a cool place down south called Pondicherry. Again, no guidebooks. So I said, okay, I'll go down there and see. And got on the bus. I got as far as Madras and got on the bus. And on the bus, girl called Terry sat on the seat in front of me and turned around and said, hi, where are you going to? And I said, well, I'm not sure where I'm going. I just came to India to study yoga. That's why I'm here and what I'm doing, and I'll find a place. And she said, oh, well, I'm going down to this ashram in Pondicherry, and where my sister's been studying with this guru for a couple of years, and apparently it's a really good place, and he speaks good English and everything, so why don't you come along? So I thought I'd been in India about 5 days at this point, and okay, that sounds right. So I landed there at the ashram that evening, and her sister was the guru's girlfriend, also his secretary, and so we had an inside kind of a family visit. The whole evening we spent talking about life in the world and yoga and different philosophies, and it was really a nice homecoming for me, and I got to know Swami Gitananda through the whole evening of talking with him very personally, and he said, oh, definitely you should just join the course because you're obviously here for this. So that began my experience with Swami Gitananda, and next day jumped right into the classes and learning how to breathe, how to detoxify the body with saltwater flushes and fasting and breathing techniques called Ekadasi, which is a psychological detox to go with the fasting and the physical detox. So for me, it was a shift into a very specific routine, but I absolutely loved it because I loved all the classes. I loved learning how to do the postures that I had been struggling with. Breathing classes. The book on yoga I had that I was traveling with was called Yoga and Health by Yasuddin Haish, which covered chakras and breathing and a lot about yoga. But now all of a sudden it just went to a whole deeper level, and I was kind of loving it, getting quite immersed in it. 5 a.m. rising, 8 hours of classes per day. That doesn't mean postures, just the first class was postures. Then there was breathing, and there was yantra yoga, there were relaxation classes, there were concentration, there was mantra, there was philosophy, there was about diet. So it was a lot of different things. It was a comprehensive course, which was 6 months long. I landed there in the middle of it. So there was 3 months left of this course, and then he extended it by a month that year. So I got an extra month in there. But 7 days a week, 8 hours a day, intensive, real yoga lifestyle with no escapes. So it's really the best way to learn it. And in setting up the Pyramid Yoga Center in Thailand, the idea was the same. The course is 3 months long, which of course there was 6 months, but it was the 3 months done twice. And the second time it had various advanced classes, but going over, reviewing, and the practicing until it was really ingrained. So the idea of a live-in experience where you're living the yoga lifestyle and you're learning and practicing every day for days and days and months puts it into your system as a habitual practice, that then not doing your yoga is like stopping eating. You're not eating one day, you kind of miss it. So it's a good way of learning it. Anyway, we had the hatha classes up at 5 in the morning and hatha classes by 6 with a lot of breathing. 9 a.m. specific breathing classes or relaxation classes. And then Jnana Yoga, which is about the mind and the emotions and relaxation techniques to see how the mind works. And then Yoga Nidras, and then Yantra classes, Yoga Chikitsa, which is a spinal therapy kind of thing. 5 in the afternoon, mantra class, and then 7, the Satsanga, the evening discussions on the philosophy of yoga and the spiritual connections, etc. So for me, it was a transformation of life into getting in touch with feeling through body sensation and experience, and then all of the knowledge about the physiology, the mind-body connection. It was an amazing time of learning. At the end of the course, after 4 months, I was so totally into it, and I had kind of renounced Western living and just taken to being a wandering monk in India, and I wandered around for a few months until the course started over again. And in that time, wandered with the monks and stayed in temples and met some pretty special people, and again, summer wanderings as a monk in India all the way up to the Himalayas and back down. It was an amazing experience. Had a couple of other brilliant teachers that I met along the way. One was Dr. Ganapati, he dealt with Ayurvedic herbs, but he was more of a magical healer. And in getting to know him a little better, I realized people would come to him for some herbs and ways to heal their problems, and he'd reach into his little drawers and pick out some herbs and give them to them. After a while, I realized they were all the same herbs. It was his connection and his touching them that actually healed them, and not the herbs. There was 4 of us who kind of saw this after a while, getting to know him. He worked at the ashram also, teaching, and he was teaching homeopathic medicine and some Ayurvedic stuff. And then in traveling, I met Om Prakash. Prakash means light, and Om, obviously. So he was up in the Himalayas. I met him, and he invited me to come and stay at his place. And he was there in this higher state of consciousness, and everybody knew that about him. But he had a family and a normal kind of lifestyle, except that everybody knew he was at a more saintly level, and whenever people would come over, they would bow down and touch his feet, and there's a holy man, real thing. Kind of as I saw it, he resembled my father a little bit, and he had the same kind of feeling of living from the heart center and being in a state of consciousness that was quite high up there. So on the way back to the ashram, after months of traveling up into the Himalayas and whatnot, and spending time with my sister came for her summer vacation from Harvard University, where she met an Indian girl who was also studying at Harvard, and came over with her. So spent some time with her and then went back, and on the way back to the ashram, I stopped in a place called Goa, not knowing anything about it. Again, someone had just mentioned it's a cool place to be, nice beaches. A lot of India doesn't necessarily have nice beaches, but this place did, so I enjoyed that connection. And one night there, I sat on a rock by the ocean, just chanting and breathing. I was going back to the ashram in a few days, and it was okay. Sit there on a flat rock by the ocean. I chanted for 4 hours, and at the end of that 4 hours, or somewhere in there, I was just chanting and breathing and chanting and breathing and kind of pushing myself to keep doing it. And somewhere between the out breath and the next breath, I felt myself, whatever self was, consciousness going up, leaving my body and going into like an orbit around the planet, as if I was in a satellite. I mean, satellites were still a new thing back then. So I was in orbit around the world and going around this way, and I had the sensation of flying like in a small plane or a roller coaster or something, these ups and downs, and seeing the world below me. And I was in this state of ecstasy and joyfulness, and realizing that I'm out here. I'm outside of the normal reality. And I realized also I'm beyond time, because I was looking down at the world and seeing and feeling and knowing that if I would go down here into Europe, it would be the 17th century. And if I went down over here into some other part of the world in North India, it was the era of the Buddha 2,000 years ago. And if I went down here, it was another point in time. And I realized the space-time connection as a reality that just hit home, because I was still into studying all this about time and space and relativity and the energy of the chakras. By now I was digesting all of that. But I saw and felt this space-time connection of how out here I was beyond time. I was in this experience in the now, and when I went back down, I would be back in the normal world. But there's this place of consciousness beyond time and beyond space. And I spent what seemed like hours just floating around in this place and seeing all these ancient cultures and different realities. But eventually I came back down to my body that was still sitting on the beach in Goa, and I had such a feeling of blissfulness that I was kind of laughing to myself, giddy, and realizing, wow, that was an experience. I was laughing for days and realizing I had gone beyond the normal world, beyond time, into a space that most people don't know even exists. And I had read a little bit about this in the Akashic Records, which is a field of energetic information that contains past, present, future. And that's actually, I was in that field at this time. So this is one of my highlight experiences after my first 4 months at the ashram and before my next 6 months at the ashram. Experiences that make you really understand things because they're so deep and so profound. Nothing theoretical about it when you have this experience. So you might be hearing it as a story, but to me it was not a story. This was my life, my real-time experience. Just carrying on with my little story here of my out-of-the-body experiences, which are mentioned in the Yoga Sutras, actually, at the very beginning, that to gain knowledge and information and inspiration about the yogic path, having these transcendental experiences is an important clue, preview. So anyway, that having shown me a whole different aspect of the universe beyond time and space, my next stop was to go back to the ashram, right across the country from West India to East India, back to Pondicherry, back to the ashram, reunion with Swami Gitananda, a few stories sharing back and forth. I had mentioned in a letter to him during the summer, no emails in those days, I'd sent him a letter and talked about my experiences with the study of yantra and consciousness and timing, etc. And said that I would be keen to help him in some way or another. So when I got back, he said, yeah, well, actually I wanted to start a little coffee shop at the ashram, so maybe you could look after that for me. I mean, I had in mind that maybe I could teach the yantra yoga because I had spent months calculating everybody's everything. But he had in mind a little coffee shop. He liked coffee, and I still like coffee. Actually, that's where I started drinking it and liking it, realizing it gives you a boost, and if you apply that boost into the practice of yoga, then it helps you to practice yoga. It provides more motivation to do more, and I have always found that, and I still drink it. Not every day, but pretty much every day. Anyhow, at the ashram we talked about how to set things up. I called my little coffee shop the Third Eye Coffee Shop, and made his coffee, which he drank quite a bit, and coffee for other students. Like I said, I hadn't been drinking coffee previously, but by now I realized its potency. So served coffee for people and for Swami all day long. Then we talked him into some of the students who came had been there a couple of times before, including Rajadev, who was there the year before when I was there, and then Jay, who'd been there a couple of years before and who also studied with Pattabhi Jois in the Ashtanga style, and Patrick and a couple of other people. And we persuaded Swami Gitananda to talk and teach a little bit more about the chakras, because he seemed very knowledgeable about so many little details that we thought getting a little bit more information about this, because we already had the techniques and spinning the chakras and visual concentration and having experiences that were kind of jaw-dropping, like, oh, wow. So we wanted to go a little further with that. So there were some advanced classes that year for us who were, let's say, senior students or returning students. And in the chakra series, he agreed to it and talked at length about each of the chakras for a few evenings. And we had an old tape recorder at the ashram. It came from somewhere. So I recorded all of the lectures, and then I transcribed them into written format, the notes of which I still have today. And from that began a much deeper experience into the realm of each of these chakras that was like an unfolding of amazing information, which most people will never find, because you can find books on the chakras, but they're all in code. They're all about gods and goddesses and demons and different things. And his take on it, his explanation of it, was that they were not really gods and goddesses. He wasn't a specific Hindu as such. He was very well versed in Sanskrit and the whole Hindu culture. But he was explaining that they're like personifications, or maybe he didn't use that word. I came up with that later. Actually, it's in the Upanishads that they're personifications of forces. And again, his approach was from medical to scientific, and about this concept of it's an energetic world of these forces of the chakras interplaying, and this is described as an interplay or a relationship between this god and that goddess. One of them is sitting in or living in the second chakra, the other one is living in the third, and they have this relationship, and the relationship is describing the interplay between the second and third chakras and these forces. And it describes in detail how this affects our body. It creates certain body fluids and hormones. He actually said more than once, a few times, that his view of the Vedas, sometimes he said, I see that the Vedas might be a book that was left to us by an ancient civilization. It's actually a medical book left to us by an advanced civilization, and we've interpreted it in this personified view of gods and goddesses. You know, what they were talking about was actually beyond the religious side into a scientific analogy and story of interplay of forces and frequencies and vibrations and all of these things. So it was a very revealing series of studies, and that caught me, really got me. And I continued with my studies in the world of chakras ever since, and I'm still doing some research on that. And now science in the West has been doing a lot of studies in neurobiology and advanced physiology, and again, quantum physics being the bottom line, which is reducing everything back down to electromagnetic fields, which they use more of the term quantum fields, but it's really all about energetic movements, vortexes of energy at minor scales and going into bigger scales all the way out to the universe. So the merging of microcosm and macrocosm, everything is made of energy. Everything is spinning. And at the big scale, how long does it take for a galaxy to spin one time? It's like billions of years. And how long does it take an atom or an electron to spin around an atom? You're talking about billionths of a second. So, but it's the same thing. It's just that the proportions are radically different. And humans are right in the middle. Size-wise, time-wise, energy-wise, we're in between the macrocosm and the microcosm, and we can go both ways. We see both worlds. So the chakra system is a understanding of this, a layout of all of these forces, the interplays, the physiological connections to everything in our body, the psychological connections to all of our thoughts, and the play of thoughts to emotions, which is melting into body chemistry. And again, the techniques are there in yoga, how to influence this, how to change situations, how to change your hormonal level and rebalance things, and how to create different brain chemistry. Again, this is something I had already experienced in the first few months there when, as I mentioned before, leaving the ashram, I was seeing from a much more psychedelic perspective, which was not the normal thing from a few years ago, and there was no psychedelics. It was just done with brain chemistry by the breathing techniques and series of advanced poses called the Oli Mudras and things like this, which alter your brain chemistry. So I had the experience of doing this. And then the experience in Goa of actually leaving my body and going flying into orbit beyond space-time was like, whoa, okay, this is a whole different view of reality, and brings it back into what I call the science of Samkhya. It's normally termed uh, Samkhya philosophy, but it's beyond philosophy. It's very meticulous and scientific. And consciousness, mind, energy, matter, and when you go beyond the matter through energy, mind, and back into consciousness, consciousness is beyond, and I had the experience of being beyond, and down through the mind back into re-energizing the body, you're coming back to this world. But when you're beyond there, you see the time itself doesn't exist either. So these experiences are mind-blowing, and they change your perspective on life, and they're incredibly empowering when you realize that with the techniques of yoga you can move all these energies in ways that build your health and stimulate everything, raise your consciousness to these amazing levels of experience that are eternal, infinite, and it continues expanding on forever. So, like, really, since that time, my life has been an adventure, and mostly a spiritual adventure. But the material side, again, I travel the world. I'm always in different places, exploring different countries and cultures. So materially, it's an adventure. But when I close my eyes and go on the inner world, the adventure continues in this exploration of space-time, a multi-dimensional universe, which is now being explained again in quantum physics, is that there isn't just one universe. It has to do with a field of energy, an ocean of energy that is all vibrating waves. And just like with our technology, I probably mentioned this already, we tune into this website or that website, this radio station, that TV station. They're all different frequencies. And you can be watching one, and the person beside you can be watching something quite different. You're sitting in the same place, but having different experiences. And this is more like the reality that we live in. It's a multidimensional universe, and we experience what we tune into. And when you close your eyes at night, you go into dreamland, which is a place of unlimited possibilities. It's not that far away. It's not that unreal, actually, when you consider quantum physics as saying, what's the universe actually made of? Waves. An ocean made of waves of possibilities. That's what they say, they call them, because they're waves that can become atoms, molecules, electrons, protons, and from there to become our cells, to become us. And when you're at that level of experience, where you can see and feel these energetic waves, and you can reconfigure atomic and molecular structures and come into a very deep healing and reset your genetic codes, even, about the telomeres that are wrapping up at the end of your DNA that stop it from falling apart. You can remanufacture some of those by putting out specific hormones, and we have the ability to control our chemistry through the energetics of the chakras. And this to me is amazing. Like I said probably earlier, at age 71, my life is still an amazing adventure. I have absolutely perfect health. I love it. I do everything I've always done. I don't feel any older than when I was in my 20s. So this concept of practicing yoga, it's not just for healing a few things. It heals your whole life, makes your life an adventure, and gives you the vitality and enthusiasm of a child. So this is what I have experienced in my 50 years of practice, and this is what I teach in the Chakra Yoga system. It's all of this stuff, and it takes a while to teach it all. It takes a while for people to get beyond their own preconceived ideas, beyond their blockages. When I say preconceived ideas, people think of yoga as a bunch of postures and have no idea that's only 1 out of 9 levels of yoga. The mind stuff is what blew me away, what attracted me into it, and this altering of consciousness and going beyond this world into states of infinite, eternal consciousness and realizing, whoa, this is always there. Whenever you step out of your body, you have this. You can step out in a dream. In yoga, you learn to take down your breathing and your heart rate and relax everything to the point where you can leave. You can do it by breathing deep and chanting, as I did on the beach in Goa. So this is an experience that is accessible. We learn to do this, and we have to train ourselves with the breathing, with the postures also, but the breathing, the mind control, overcoming fears, all of these things are part of the evolution, part of the education of yoga. It's not a simple thing, but it's amazing. So, Pyramid Yoga is the place in Thailand where we teach this, and the system I call Chakra Yoga System because it's all about the chakras. That's what I've been studying all my life, and it's amazingly scientific. It is the new scientific system. If people learn it and understand it, they'll realize this really is scientific. And just like quantum physics is the baseline science, the Chakra Yoga system is the baseline science applied to human reality, not to technology. So, leave you at that. I hope the story inspires you a little bit. It inspired my life. It's still inspiring me, so happy to share it with you all. Namaste.